Hello and welcome to the latest episode of The Talking Tradesman. In the studio with me today, I have Sara from SK Painting and Decorating.
Hello.
First off, thank you very much for making the effort and coming and being with me this evening in the studio.
You're very
We
welcome.
also, honourable mention, we've got Lauren slightly off camera here with Sara. So, yeah, don't want to miss you out and pretend that you don't exist. But Sara, let's talk.
Yep.
How are you?
I'm really, really nervous right now.
Okay, that's
But
cool.
generally,
Yeah.
all right.
Listen, like I say, most guests are like a bit nervous because it's really a very unnatural thing
Yes.
to have people blaring horns in the background straight away. But yeah, it's quite an unnatural thing. But you will forget that these are here, and
Yeah.
if I'm lying, you can tell me so in about half an hour.
All right. I will do. Don't worry.
Sara, as you know, I'll say this many times, but every journey, every story has a beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back and find out a little bit about yourself. I mean, first of all, whereabouts in the country are you from?
So we are just outside of Bristol, just North Bristol. So only about an hour and 15 away from
It's
here.
not too bad from here, is it?
In a very nice little posh village called Frampton Cottrell.
Okay, I think I've been through it in the past. It rings a bell, that one.
It's a very nice place to live.
Yeah. So what's your working area? Do you go into Bristol?
I do go into Bristol, yeah. I'll travel a relative distance, I think, because I'm still kind of new, I feel like. So I've got some clients in Frome, Bath. We come up occasionally as far as Stroud. But yeah.
I think I've done work in Stroud, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I cover most of what I would consider to be the Midlands, but I kind of think an hour out, an hour back.
Yes.
So with you being in Bristol, we probably actually, I know that I've definitely done work. I have done work in Stroud and Tewkesbury as well, which you probably came past on the way straight up the M5.
Yes, we did.
Super. I mean, jumping in, we're going to go back and keep it chronological afterwards. But how long have you been in business? How long's the decorating been going?
So I've been working as a decorator now for, did we say 5 years? So 5 years I've been effectively out on my own as a decorator.
Okay, that's not that new.
Before that, I was working alongside my dad, who's actually a general builder, a bit of a jack of all trades, for a couple of years. And before that, I was in the police, which we'll have a chat about in a bit. So all in all, I've been in the trade for probably about 7 years now.
Okay, cool. Wow. Let's, as I say, let's take it back chronological then. How was life for you as a youngster?
So I can quite happily say I was quite lucky. I had a really nice childhood growing up. My parents are still together. They've been married 47 years. Thank you. I had to have the prompt for my
Wow.
life.
Do you know what? Shout out to Sara's parents. Like that's a feat.
It is quite impressive. They are deserving of their own sort of sitcom sometimes.
Yeah.
They're quite entertaining. Yeah, love them. I've got an older brother. He's 7 years older than me, so it's a reasonable gap between us. So we're not super close, but we all live within about 10 minutes of one another.
That's
still.
nice, though. That's cool.
Yeah. And yeah, so my early childhood was quite nice. Can't really say I've got any complaints about that.
That's good, though. It's not. Do you know what? It's actually nice to hear.
Yes.
All too often, I mean, I think parents that are still together have got to be in the minority now. I don't know what the figures are.
I think nowadays, definitely.
But yeah, I'm sure the percentages of marriages that go the distance are quite small. So
yeah,
that's nice.
Yeah, and I would say as I got older, I discovered I'd had quite a nice little sheltered life, that I was quite naive and that my parents were still together and everything was quite nice and simple. And as you go out into the world and you see a bit more of it, you then start to realise, oh, not everybody has the same story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So how was the school system is always a point of interest for me, because I tend to find people that are in the construction industry tend to have some views on it, shall we say.
Yes. So personally, I can't say I had a negative time at school in terms of school itself.
Yeah.
They never caused me grief particularly. In secondary school, I think probably like a lot of people, I started to have more difficulties socially more than academically. I was never a huge academic achiever. I did medium, I suppose one would say. I did A-levels. I did go to university. but school itself was fine, wasn't particularly a problem. As I say, it was the social aspect of it that I struggled. Friends, understanding exactly how to function in social settings with lots of people and the rules that you're supposed to follow and how it all works. I kind of struggled with that bit.
Okay.
So I would say probably by the time I got to sixth form, I quite happily associated myself with like the outcasts and like the geeks and the weirdos. I very firmly put myself in that category and was quite happy there.
Yeah.
And it meant I hung out predominantly then with a lot of the nerdy boys more than anybody else, and I quite liked that. I did a year in college where I can say I took no friends away from that. I went to university. I took no friends away from that either.
When you were in this system, just to jump in a little bit, what was your direction? Like, was there intention? Were you aiming towards a particular career? Or?
No, I had no idea what I wanted to do at all. The only thing I knew was that I felt very immature and I did not feel confident to go out into the workplace. I didn't know what I wanted to do, what direction I wanted to take. I'll just stay in education. That's safe. I don't like change. I like things that are the same.
Okay.
So I liked to stay in a system that I knew and I felt comfortable with.
I think there's a massive proportion of kids that do that.
I think there are.
If I'm honest, I did exactly the same thing. Got to the end of my GCSEs and thought exactly that. I've got no idea what I want to do. I'll stick to what I know. So I went into sixth form. The difference was I was asked to leave after the first year. So
that's the same as my brother.
Yeah. I quickly realised it wasn't for me. The minute you gave me free choice, so I had that entitlement of I've chosen to be here, so I will do what I want, basically. Yeah. And my big thing, I've never been great at being told what to do anyway. It was free periods where I got into all the issues. Yeah. So during class, I was fine.
Yeah.
But the time that I counted as my own, where I was then told, you can't do this, you can't do that, you've got to stay on school grounds, you've got to sit in the common room or go and study in the library. And I thought, well, I've chosen to be here, so I'm going to go and do what I want.
Yeah.
And that didn't really go very well with the school.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was the root of my issues and the reason why I was asked to leave at the end of it.
Whereas I found they gave me rules and structure and I was like, yeah, I'll go with that. That's fab. You want me to have these breaks and study these things at these times? Works for me. Okay. I like that structure. I like the rigidity of those rules.
Yeah.
It makes me feel quite comfortable, which I think is entirely the reason I stayed in education for as long as I did.
Yeah, absolutely.
I went to university, but I stayed locally, so I still lived at home and commuted to university. And I went to a university. I went to one of the ones in Bath that used to be university college. So
Bath is nice.
It's lovely. Yeah, Bath is lovely.
It is nice.
And Bath Spa used to be university college, so it's very small. The campus at the time that I went was in the middle of a working farm. So being someone who likes outside, likes small things, I drove up this
middle of a working farm. So what were you studying?
Well, I actually studied psychology and religion.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it although it's in a farm, farming is not
nothing to do with it.
Nothing of the academia. No.
How odd.
It's one of the universities that has the largest number of PGCE courses, actually.
Oh, okay.
So there's a lot of people going into teaching in there. Yeah. Yeah, but I drove up this driveway that's like a mile long in between fields and cows, and I was like, this is wonderful. I'll come here. And then they had subjects that were really interesting.
Out of interest, just to probe on that one a bit, how did you find studying psychology? Because obviously I've done the same. So.
I really, really enjoy it. I did an evolutionary psychology semester and really enjoyed it. Trying to understand people and the way they work is fascinating. People are fascinating. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah.
I feel exactly the same.
Yeah.
Did you find, because for me, studying psychology for me was like lifting the lid on myself. So learning about, you just end up, or I ended up just relating everything, not only to the people around me, but also back to myself. So, sort of you learn about these theories and various things and thinking, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I fit into that. I ended up unpicking myself. It was like self-therapy for me.
I found, as I said, I'd always been in the like outsider group. I found it highlighted the kind of differences an awful lot more. So I'm autistic, but self-identified. I've never been tested officially.
Okay.
But when I was at university, I remember sitting in a seminar, a criminology, a psychology. It was about psychology and about criminology. And the lecturer was asking questions about morality and rights and wrongs and what things you considered to be right. And I noticed at that point that my answers were really, really rigidly different to everybody else's. So at no point did I consider that doing things that were wrong were ever acceptable.
Okay. So you were on like the law-abiding side,
It's super
heavily,
law-abiding side, yeah.
which actually you've told me you were in the police, so
Yeah.
that makes sense. But
So like to an absolute extreme, I was like, no, there's never any excuse for breaking the law. Never.
Okay.
Obviously, I understand that things are not that simple. But at the time when I went and put my hand up for all these things and people were like, no, we don't agree with that, I was like, oh my God, I'm so different. I'm really standing out a bit weird now. And leading from there, never really thought a great deal more of it until I met my partner. And then we kind of made jokes that I'm a little bit autistic, a little bit, there's some patterns to my behavior and my dislike of change, my like of routine, my like of a beige food diet. All these kinds of things started to fit into place. And I did all the testing you can do under the sun that you can do yourself, that everyone can access off the internet. We watched, there was a string of documentaries on like Channel 4 and BBC about the diagnosis of women later in life and all those kinds of things. And it kind of it started to be more real. And then when we took the decision to go into the adoption stuff, it was a conversation that had to become very, very real because of the impact that it would potentially have on adopting, how it would affect me, how it could affect whomever we adopt, things like that. So it became something that we had to have a real serious conversation about.
Yeah.
Interestingly, because I work for myself, I've never felt the need to particularly go for an official diagnosis, because a lot of people go for special dispensations at work. They may need extra help at work. They may need various other things. It's not something that is medicated like ADHD.
Yeah.
I've got a pretty good understanding of myself nowadays. So I've done a lot of reading around it. I'm fairly confident to say
I think, to be honest, that the best medicine you can do is to understand yourself. Let's take a moment there to say a massive thank you to our headline sponsors, Zinza, and have a quick chat about their new product, Bin Aqua. Now, Zinza Bin needs no introduction, but have you heard of the Bin Aqua? It's their most innovative launch yet, and it does everything that Bin does, but it's water-based. It's a water-based 4-in-1 primer, sealer, stain and odour blocker. It's designed to block all stains, including water, nicotine and mould, and it expertly seals, unlike Zinza Bin, interior and exterior. Now, I can hand on heart say that I've used this product regularly in my own business and it performs excellently. Fully endorsed. Go and check out Zinza Bin Aqua. Let's get back to the episode.
Yes.
And I actually, I'm not a big fan of a lot of modern terms, but neurodivergent is one that I actually quite like because to me, and I've said this before on previous episodes, it just means brain different.
Yeah.
And I think I know there are people on the autism spectrum that are severe autism where it becomes inhibiting to day-to-day life.
Yeah.
But I think they say, don't they, that everybody is on the spectrum. It just depends where you are.
I would challenge that slightly.
Okay. It's something I've heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, I could be entirely wrong. I could be tested one day and they could tell me, no, you're not autistic. And then I would just have to accept that.
How do they test? See, this is one of the things though, isn't it? How do you, other than, I guess, answering questions and behavioural tests, it's not like they can take your blood.
No.
And definitively say, yes, you have this. Like it's it's a way of thinking, isn't it? It's a way of your brain's behaviour, which is, again, the whole term neurodivergent, just being brain different.
Yeah.
So like I say, I like that, because to me, I think that it needs to be clarified that there's nothing wrong.
No.
It's just different.
Yes. Agreed.
In just the same way, to me, that you have, left-handed people, right-handed people.
Yeah.
There's differences in humans, and potentially, if you are autistic, then your brain just works different to the majority of the population.
Yeah.
Because I think that's it. If there were more, if the majority of the population were exactly like yourself, then other people would be, labelled, as it were, or deemed different. So it just swings with whatever the majority is.
Yes. Yeah.
Which, as I say, I like that sort of description of it because of that. It's just highlighting the difference. How did that play out for you, sort of in your university journey?
So aside from that particular lecture where I went, oh God, I'm really very different to everybody, I went back into my little own world, in my own little bubble, and just carried on and was oblivious to it in any other respect, really.
But then, by the sounds of it, didn't hinder you.
I mean, I was quite content living the life that I was. I bought a horse with my student loan. After I bought all my books, I hasten to add, I bought all the sensible things first.
All right. I don't think, I might be wrong. I'm not sure that that's what a student loan's for.
I mean, I could have piddled it away on alcohol, but I didn't. Mine was a solid investment that I could have sold had I ever wanted to.
Investment.
Yes, it was an investment. Okay, and that is really what a student loan is. It is an investment in one's future.
Yeah.
So I bought a horse with my student loan, and so I got him initially as I started uni. So I had university, I had my horse, and at the time I had like a little part-time job, and that was it. I was quite happy. That was life.
I take it. I know a little bit about horses and horse riding. So I went through a period of my life when I moved in with my mother. I won't go into my whole thing, but long story short, I lived on an equestrian centre for 4 years. I'm not a big fan of horses. Just to put that out there. They're very big and unpredictable as far as I see it.
Yeah.
So I'm not for. I lived on an equestrian centre. I never sat on a horse once, and pretty much avoided them at all given opportunities.
That's
but
fair.
I do know that they're a lifestyle, aren't they? Horses.
Yeah.
It's like really intensive in terms of. And don't get me wrong, people who are into horses, that's what they want to be doing.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess having the horse became your social side.
Very much so, yeah. I made lots of, you'd say friends, but like acquaintance type people. I knew lots of people then through horses. They all had the same pastime as me, so it was a real intense interest, something that you have in common with someone. And horsey people are quite unique. They are all pretty obsessed about their horses. Is their life. So yeah, for a long time that was.
You still ride now?
I don't at the moment, no. Unfortunately, we lost my horse just before COVID.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And financially wise, I've not had the time or the money at the moment to get another one.
Mega expensive,
yes, and it's gotten so much worse.
Yeah.
I spoke to someone a couple of months ago about the cost of things, and I was just like, oh my God, I don't know how I would afford it now.
You're tied in as well, aren't you? Because I know, like you said, horse people are severely emotionally bonded to their animal.
Yeah.
So if you've made that investment, you've got a horse, and all the feed goes through the roof, and everything goes through the roof. There's no choice. You can't just go, I don't want to do this now.
Yeah.
And I know people do sell horses now and again, but I think I'd personally struggle with that. I like animals. I get attached to animals. I think if I liked horses and I had a horse, you wouldn't be able to sell it, because it would be like selling one of the family.
I think it depends on. So my first horse I bought and I kept him till the very end. I did have a second one, but I bought him with a purpose, and he never quite fit the right box, really. He was a little bit too small, and he just wasn't quite right. So between the two of them, the first one was always going to stay. So I chose to sell the other one.
See, I know nothing. I know nothing about horses, to be honest.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So how, I mean, with the university, so did you go all the way through?
Yes, I graduated university. Not wonderfully, I got a 2-2, but I passed.
2-2 is a pass.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I made it out. And then I think I got to the end, and I was like, oh God, what do I do now? Where do you go now? I still wasn't ready to go out into the world, really. So I continued doing the job, the little part-time job that I'd had since I was 14, which was just working in like a little local cafe. And I did that until I was about 24. Again, highlighting my lack of continuity there. And when I was in my early 20s, I went, well, I could just join the police, couldn't I? That seemed like a sensible thing to do. Yeah, I'll do that. So I tried for the regulars a couple of times and missed the mark. No life experience, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I eventually got in as a PCSO.
Yeah.
Into neighbourhood policing. And I started training for that. I was in training school actually during the London Olympics. So I was at training school for, I think it was 8 weeks you go to training school for, and then I went to go and do neighbourhood policing in the lovely city of Bath.
Okay.
So of all the places to get to go in that particular constabulary, I chose a very nice one. I was very lucky. And I did neighbourhood policing in the city centre of Bath for about 6.5 years.
Wow.
So
okay.
my community of people was the homeless people and the beggars.
Right.
Obviously, there is a high portion of people that live in the city centre,
Yeah.
but there is a very high proportion of homeless people.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, and so those were the people that I was dealing with an awful lot.
Quite often you do see that, don't you, though? I mean, my opinion about Bath from the times that I've been in and been through are that it's very affluent.
Yeah.
And you tend to get those areas, don't you, with high affluence, is you also get high homelessness.
Yes.
And then you've got this weird, like, situation where you've got extreme wealth and then you've got both ends of the scale operating within seconds of each other, haven't you? It's a weird situation
because it's such a tourist hotspot as well.
Yeah.
It's a real draw for. So a lot of the beggars aren't necessarily homeless. They're really vulnerable people, but they're not necessarily homeless. But they know that certain locations, like with a high footfall, those are the right places to sit. Those are the right places to go and to beg. For whatever reasons they've come into that particular situation. A lot of them are mental health issues.
Yeah.
There are substance abuse issues. So that was the first time I'd ever come across people that hadn't had that normal upbringing. I remember going to one of the first jobs I went to with a tutor, and there was going to be something outside Bath Abbey. And they always have a busker in the square of Bath Abbey. It might have been Remembrance Day, actually. And they all get asked, they have a buskers meeting in the morning, and they're all told at whatever time on Remembrance Day you stop playing. All makes sense, that's fine. So we were getting close to that time, and my tutor went, well, we'll give him 5 more minutes because he's still playing, and then we'll go over and we'll ask him to stop. Right, okay, yeah, brilliant. So 5 minutes goes and he's still playing. So right, over you go and ask him to stop then. So I'm like, off I go, I'm trundling over. I'm like, yeah, I'm a PCSO, no one's going to say no to me. I got such a barrage of abuse and I had no idea what to do with it.
From the busker?
Yes. Yeah. He just took one look at me and he was like, nah, I'm not listening to anything you say. And I didn't know what to do with that. I was like, but I'm in the police. Like, why would you not do what I ask? Like, I was polite, I was nice. I'm asking you to do something sensible. So it was a huge culture shock. And this was just in Bath. This isn't even somewhere really difficult to police.
And how, I mean, just to highlight that one situation, how did you deal with that?
I scurried back to my tutor and I went, he won't stop. So I had a lot to learn. So my very kind tutor of the day took me over and we went and spoke to him again. And he was like, no, mate, come on, you got a Foxtrot Oscar. But it took me a while to gain the confidence to be able to actually go up and tell people, because as a PCSO, you've got no power of arrest.
Yeah.
You've got no PPE. I mean, you've got your stab vest, but you've got nothing other than words to get you out of a situation.
In a lot of ways, it's a more difficult job than actually being a fully fledged officer, because you are almost put in that position. You're made to look like a police officer, but like you said, you haven't got the same powers of arrest. And let's be honest, the demographic of people that deal with the police on a regular basis, they know everything.
They do.
So they know exactly what they can get away with and who they can get away with it.
They do, yeah.
I wouldn't want to do that job. Not as any disrespect to you or what you did or the police, just because of that.
Yeah.
Because of the position that you are put in, but without the actual backup of the law being behind you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed my time in it, as it happens. But it really taught me an awful lot.
You ever consider the transition into full police?
I did, yes. So can you remember how many times I tried? 3. Yeah. So once I was in and they told me you didn't have enough experience, I applied another couple of times. The first 2 I didn't get through. The third one I got through to the assessment centre. So bearing in mind I've been doing it nearly 7 years. They'd introduced lots of new computer systems, and at a particular time when I was not able to go out on patrol, I learned about all these computer systems, and I was teaching all my PC colleagues how to use it. I went to the assessment centre and I failed by 2 marks, and they were like, nope. And I was like, are you joking me? Because I didn't. The assessment centre is more about buzzwords, saying the right thing in the right scenario. And because I didn't hit quite the right marks, I didn't get it. And they have to have a pass mark. I understand that. But also I was like, I could do that job standing on my head now. I've done it without having parva, without having CS or cuffs, any of that. And you still don't recognise that.
Yeah, that's tough. Is there, not to pry too much, but is there a regret that sits there that you didn't ever progress into it?
No. So one of the things that I found towards the end of my journey in the police is that it's an organisation where the people on the ground, they're all really, really good people. They want to do a really good job. They want to be out there catching bad guys. They want to be out there solving your crimes. They care. But they're in a position where they don't have the time, the resources to put to that. And there are people higher up the food chain, effectively, whose ambition means that they often step on those people. And there were a couple of instances where colleagues, other PCSOs, were kind of used for people to climb the ladder. And I had no respect for that. There were other things in there. So they're obviously, the police deal with crime. They deal with criminals. And we probably spent 70% of our time dealing with mental health issues, misburs, missing people. I went to God knows how many jobs of looking for particular people that would frequently go missing because they had real mental health troubles. And you spend your time having had no training around mental health support or how to talk to someone with severe mental health problems. And that's what you spend a lot of your time dealing with. And it gets really difficult when all you want to do is help people, but you're not trained to help those people. They shouldn't be in custody, in a custody unit. They shouldn't be in the back of a police car. They're not criminals. There was an instance when somebody had been arrested under the Mental Health Act. And at the time, the policy was to take them to a place of safety, which custody is not considered to be at that particular time. So they took them to the hospital. And the hospital were like, no, we can't see them. No, can't do that. Sorry. So this person had been detained and was held for about 20 hours outside the hospital on the grass, having a complete mental health crisis. They had to be restrained. They were in cuffs.
That's horrible.
That's awful.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, Sarah, it needs highlighting because and I refer to it as a mental health crisis, and we're in it.
Yeah.
Like, we are fully in it. There's many things, and one of the eye openers for me has been the volunteer work that I do at Samaritans, and then the education, actually, like learning psychology and studying social science and the history of mental health care and the asylum system and all of that kind of thing. And realistically, in the UK, ever since we went and reverted into a care in the community system, it's gone downhill from there.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because it is meant to be care in the community, and that there are very few institutions that are hugely understaffed and undermanned, people that are really struggling are out in society.
Yeah.
And like you quite rightly said, the police aren't trained to deal with them.
No.
They're there to prevent crime. Yet most people's reaction if they see somebody acting strangely is call the police.
Yeah.
And then you kind of expect, well, these people are going to come and they're going to take that problem from outside my house and put it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the reality is, a lot of people don't know. There's this huge raised awareness of mental health at the moment, which is fantastic. But there's a perception that comes with that the government or government agencies are also upping their contribution, whatever it might be, into helping. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yep.
That the mental health budget from the government has been consecutively cut. One of the statistics that shocked me was that the budget per head of population was at its highest at the peak of the asylum system. Ever since care in the community came in, that budget has shrank. But if you ask people, they'll probably tell you that they think it's being increased year on year. And some of we're not allowed to talk about the content of calls that we take at Samaritans, because obviously a confidentiality. But what I can say is that there's a huge proportion of mental health and severe mental health. And some of the things and the people that we talk to, and you ask them, where are you? Well, I'm at home.
Yeah.
And the things you're listening to and being told, it's very clear that these people are in full psychotic episodes.
Yeah.
And you sort of try and direct them to, are you under the care of? And it's, I've got a mental health team and I've rung my crisis line. And one example that I have spoken about before, and I will do again, was somebody that was talking about actively ending their own life. And they'd rung their crisis team. The crisis team had said, we'll call you back in about 4 days. In the meantime, ring Samaritans.
Yeah.
And as fantastic as an organisation as Samaritans is, we're volunteers.
Yeah, it shouldn't be them that are picking up the slack.
The training's great, but we're not professionals.
Yeah.
Not to speak out of turn, but I probably know maybe slightly more than the average volunteer because I've studied psychology. A lot of people are just good people that want to help people. And they just do the Samaritans training, which is great. I'm not knocking that.
Yeah.
But we're not trained to deal with people in full psychotic episodes or severe mental health breakdowns.
Yeah.
And that is probably what surprised me most about joining that organisation, was the sheer volume of mental health calls opposed to crisis due to life circumstance.
You'd see the same if you looked at sort of the average call lists. When I was in the police, you could look at the sort of the live calls on the screen, and the number that were actually related to crime as opposed to mental health is a shocking split, a really, really shocking split of how many calls the police are getting that are related to mental health.
Yeah. It's a spiral, isn't it? Because I guess if a call comes into the police that there's what would you class it as, a disturbance? I mean,
it can be also there are tags for mental health things, but I remember after that incident that I just discussed about, we had a meeting with the local mental health team to discuss that. At the time, our supervisors didn't want us to be going to that. They were like, this is not the kind of thing we should be going to. Incidentally, I think it's the Met that then started to follow suit. I think after I'd left the police, that then went, we're not going to attend mental health calls anymore. So they've started to put their foot down. But at the end of the day, if someone's threatening to take their life, like, the police will step in. They will always do it, because they are that organisation that they are going to go and prevent loss of life. It's like one of the core things that they'll try to prevent. But it's, I've lost count of the number of calls that I went to where you're dealing with. I mean, I held someone's body weight whilst they were hanging from a tree, whilst a colleague was trying to cut them down. Like, I was a PCSO. Like,
and
they lived. They didn't die.
Oh wow!
They were a frequent flyer. We knew them really well, but like, it was.
What do you mean by frequent flyer? Sorry.
So they came into contact with the police all the time.
Okay.
Because the mental health services were failing them, so they were very well known to the neighbourhood team.
If you're able, can you tell me what happened on that occasion?
On that occasion, so it was a really late one, because I remember we got sent out into this field, and MPAS, the helicopter's up above, and it's like, well, we think the phone's pinging around this particular area. I don't know exactly where they are, but we'll ping their phone. So we all got sent into the forest, basically.
Who had made the call? Them or
so they had made the call. They'd made the call that they'd had a conversation with so they were living in like assisted living, and they were having a particularly difficult time there. For other various reasons. They were basically then having a crisis. They'd gone out with the full intention of hanging themselves. So everybody gets sent out en masse to look, and we were in the forest, and the helicopter's like, right, shine your torch up, because I've got this heat source. And then the helicopter guides whichever torch light, basically, they can see closest to the heat source. And it happened that my colleague and I were the two that were closest. So we get like guided in, and then you're just like, oh, okay. Oh, and it's just everybody, you do what you can. You just grab them. And
did you see them? Was it when it's hanging? I don't know whether they jumped off something, or
they weren't
already hanging at the point.
They were already hanging at the point we got there.
Shit.
And my colleague was like a little Swiss Army knife of tools. So I held this person, and he had like little blades to cut from RTC, so you could cut your seatbelts and things. So he had all these little bits, and he loved a gadget, he did. So he got this thing out and he cut them down, and then they kick off. And you're like, oh my God, I'm not even trained to do this either. I'm not trained to be hands-on. So you've just held someone up so that they can be cut down, and they'd obviously not been hanging very long, thankfully. And then you get into a scrap on the floor with them, because you then have to effectively detain them, even though you're not really technically supposed to be hands-on with these people, because you're a PCSO, you haven't got the power to do that.
That takes some processing, though, doesn't it? So, I mean, were you, ask the question, but did you receive any sort of debrief, counselling, whatever, after experience?
So every call that has a death or a really serious incident has a tag on it. So you get, as a matter of routine, you get an email that says, you attended this incident, it had something serious happen, would you like some help? And that's the only active involvement that the police at the time, it could be different now, that they give you.
As a question, because that's a weird one, isn't it? If they ask you if you need help, is it frowned upon, or would you be looked down upon or persecuted if you said yes?
It's mixed, because there was one colleague who did often say yes, they needed help. And they were kind of a little bit the butt of jokes sometimes.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
And yet there were other colleagues who attended, like they were called in to help at the riots at Stokes Croft, or they went to an incident where like someone was coming at them with a knife, and they had a knife like in their helmet, and they didn't go for help. They didn't say, yes, please, I need to speak to someone. And then later down the line, both of those two people had complete breakdowns about it. One of them I mean, one of them left the police. I mean, he went to the Stokes Croft riots, and from what I understand, he had like concrete blocks thrown at the riot van and came through the window as he was driving and things. And he was such a nice bloke. He was so good at his job, but I just don't think he ever spoke to people about it. And he just kind of went, no, that's just what happened at my job. That's just what I got to deal with.
Yeah.
And then this other guy went to this incident with this chap with the knife, ended up with it in his helmet. And again, like, I don't think whether he didn't realise that it had affected him so much, but like he went to a call later on down the line where I think he went, oh, maybe I've had more of an impact from these incidents. And I kind of think I went to a few things. I didn't go to as many as like a full-on police officer does because I'm only a PCSO, but will those come back and haunt me later on in life? I don't know.
I think they have a cumulative effect. I've experienced something, I guess, slightly akin to what you'd have experienced in the police force, in that I worked as a bailiff for 4 years.
Yeah.
So we were collecting warrants on the behalf of local authorities. And I did that job for 4 years. I had people try and kill me. I mean, I got ran over twice. I got attacked with an axe. I got all sorts. I've knives to my neck, a gun pointed at me.
Yeah.
There was a lot went on during my time doing that. The reason I ask that is because, again, there was a bizarre culture which I didn't even recognise while I was in it. But you would have been seen as weak if you were to, if something happened on a day and you were to go back to the office and be like, look, this happened, I need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
There would definitely have been, because it was a very macho culture, as you can imagine. Definitely you'd have been looked at like, you ain't going to last long.
Whereas I think because you have, in the police where you've got a team, they're really supportive within that team.
Yeah.
So I found there's a lot of really dark humour.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to have that to deal with some of the things that you're seeing all the time. And like your immediate supervisors, like your sergeant and your inspector, I had one inspector who was incredible, who looked after his team to such an extent that I think he was fantastic. But it doesn't seem to go any higher than that. I think because you have that little unit and your supervisor knows everybody in that unit, they really care about them. They're a little family.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really seem to go much farther than that. It could be totally different. I've been out a long time now, but
I get
at
that.
the time,
I mean, it's weird, isn't it? Because the further you get removed from the action, as it were, the more desensitised the people higher up get. And we certainly, with what I did, it was certainly like that. Some of the times you'd go on a job and then your manager would be like, well, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you just take this or whatever? And mate, he was swinging a bar at me.
Yeah.
Well, you should have just, and it's one of those, like, you weren't there.
Yeah.
But I can also understand the culture, because that was the same. It was a very macho culture, but I guess there was a weird support. Everyone kind of laughed it off. But I certainly found, so I did that job for 4 years and I got really numb to it. Like, things would happen that I look back at now and I'd be like horrified. And it'd be like, oh, yeah, somebody tried to stab me today.
Yeah.
Or, can I have 2 sugars in my coffee? I got really weirdly desensitised from it. And I think certain experiences, we're not designed to be thrown into on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
And you have to suppress it. And then eventually those things come out.
Well, I think if you're in an instance like the police, I think you have so much compassion, and then you are just going to be completely fatigued by it, and you are dealing with the same crap effectively day in, day out, and you're this one little cog in the machine that's not affecting any change, and you're just having the same stuff every day, and you find it hard then to be sympathetic. Even though that is what the vast majority of people need, is some sympathy for the situation that they might be in.
A friend of mine actually went a similar route. So he's a detective now. But he started at PCSO and has climbed the ladder, as it were. And I spoke to him about it the once when he was sort of like normal on the beat policing. And he basically expressed that the frustration was that they're there to do exactly what you've said before, to stop crime, catch the bad guys. But then you've got the arrest on the day and then the CPS behind it. And they'll arrest people one day and then by the afternoon they're out. Or, they've been released or they're not charged. And, it's just repeat offending and it must wear you down.
Yeah.
And you think you're there doing your job and you're there to try and protect the good guys, the general public, whatever you want to say. But you're being hindered by the bureaucracy above.
Yes.
Which has got to be difficult.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of colleagues that I could say you could identify that in, the frustration of just that rigroll of the same thing day in, day out.
So when did it get to the point where you decided enough was enough?
So after I failed at the assessment centre, I think me and my wife went out for dinner with my parents, and it's like, oh, I've failed again. What am I going to do now? And before I joined the police, I worked with my dad, and I did the first year of an electrical engineering apprenticeship at the college. And then the police called up and I went, oh no, I'm going to trot off and do that. Sounds far more exciting. So after that failed and was still trucking along as a PCSO and had this meal out with my parents, and my dad sort of went, why don't you just come back with me? And I was like, yes, that sounds like a fab idea. Why don't I just go back and work with you? And I think because the electrical work was so out of date and I was never particularly good at it, I went back and worked with him. I went, oh, I quite fancy a bit of this painting malarkey. I think I'd be good at that. So I was part-time with the police, working with my dad and going to college for my painting, decorating MVQ.
Cool.
So I did all of those together.
Yeah.
Right just a year before COVID. So I did 1 year and then I was doing my second year and then COVID hit. And I was like, that's the perfect time to go like totally self-employed, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do that.
It was I don't know what your experience of COVID was with your business or going self-employed, but it was a weird one for me. We didn't start. I worked all the way through. There was no point where the government actually stopped us going into homes.
Yeah.
There was recommendation at the beginning, but once that all kind of got lifted, we just worked. Like, if anything, I worked double down.
So because I was still working with Dad at that point, I was only doing the odd bit of painting work. I was doing bathroom fitting and that kind of stuff with him. And the job that we were in the middle of, we stopped. We joked that it was like the longest bathroom in the history. Because my partner works in healthcare, so works with much more vulnerable people. There are vulnerable people in the family and things. So I was like, no, we're going to take those 6 weeks off. So we stopped for those 6 weeks. My dad, bless him, was like, I won't take a wage. You can have my wage because you need it more.
Oh,
so
him.
Love him. Like my parents were fantastic. They were really, really helpful. So we had 6 weeks off. And then after that, because they were kind of like, work people can carry on working. It's fine. We went, okay, yeah, I think we can go back. So yeah, we went back and carried on. And for the most part, it's been really, really busy ever since that.
Brilliant. Well, there's a skill shortage. If you're good at what you do, you'll be busy. That's my experience of it. I'm third generation, but I've been running the business 24 years, and touch wood, there's never been a time where I've had to stress about not getting work. If anything, my stresses come from having too much work and trying to organise it all. I want to just quickly actually ask Lauren a question, because with Sara doing that job, like, how was that for you? Did you worry, like, when she's coming back with these kind of stories of that sort of thing happening on a day?
My dad was in the fire service.
Right. Okay.
So it was
kind of normal for you, wasn't it?
Right. Okay. So you've got that sort of upbringing. Yeah. Right. Okay. That makes sense.
And it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you knew what you were getting into, and like we'd not long known each other. The dark side of the job really fascinated me, and you get like a tick sheet in your training of things that you've dealt with, and I was like, I haven't had my first dead body yet, and we had.
Go and sit with them
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, what? That's a good
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Sorry, what?
So if it's like an unexplained death, effectively, once it's discovered, someone stays with the body until the coroner can come and take it.
Oh.
So there was this one job that came up that was in the city centre, and we were waiting for the support group because this person had been dead quite some time, and it wasn't that the coroner could just come and pick them up. They needed to be like scooped, effectively. So I'd not met Lauren.
You're putting some lovely pictures.
I know, right? And I text Lauren and I'm like, I've got my first dead body. And she texts me out, she's like, are you all right? And I'm like, yes, amazing. And I was fascinated. And the support group are like, do you want to come in and have a look? We'll talk you through it. I'm like, oh, this is amazing, this is.
You don't have to wait on your own with a body, do you? They say somebody's got to stay with it. I mean, I imagine that would just be creepy as hell.
I don't think I ever stayed on my own with anybody, with a body on my own.
Was there a lot of bodies doing that?
What, like melted?
Well, no. Just generally dead, Sarah. They don't have to be grotesquely melted. Just were there a lot of dead bodies to deal with?
Well, it took a really long time to get my first one.
Yeah.
But then after that, it was a fairly frequent occurrence.
Oh, Christ, yeah. I guess, again, it's something that you get used to or numb to, isn't it? I mean, Christ, funeral directors deal with them day in, day out. But it's... I mean, open-handed here, I don't think I've been with a dead body. So I'll probably remember it if I had, so no, I haven't.
You definitely have. I went to an autopsy. Oh, wow, as part, so when you're in the police, you can request to go and do like a little secondment with CID, or you can go to whatever. And I went, can I go to the coroner's court for the day? And they're actively encourage you to do it. They'll happily go. So I went down to watch an autopsy. Wow. And it's fascinating. It's really, really interesting.
I'm not sure how I mean, yes, I can understand the interest. Personally, I'm not sure I could sit through that. I don't know.
Yeah, there were some people. So there were a few people that went from different organisations, and there were a few people that couldn't stomach it.
Maybe if I got eased in, maybe eased in with like a standard dead body, and then maybe a slightly worse one, and then progress to melted.
Yeah.
And then eventually...
I mean, I started pretty high, so then like the standard body at the autopsy was fine.
Exactly. Maybe you have to see a melted body, then autopsy would be like, meh.
Yeah. But it's just, that's normal, that's fine.
I'll tell you what, fairly, it's the first time I've ever had this conversation, so well done on that one. This is definitely a first.
Yeah, I've been to some interesting ones. Yeah. I'm really like trying to not tell you grotesque stories now.
No, listen, give me the grotesque stories. I'll make great clips.
Okay, so there was one, I didn't get to go to this one, and I'm really, really sad. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't jest, because it was a suicide and it's really awful. But as I say, it's kind of the dark humour side of it. But they jumped off of a rather high bridge, and they'd used... I'm not kind of sure what kind of wire it was, but it went...
Oh, yeah.
So that they were separate, sadly.
I must admit, my friend who said about it was PCSO. When he was a PCSO, he told us that he had to attend a call where somebody had stepped out in front of a high-speed train. There's relatively local to here, actually. There's a high-speed route and a bridge that goes over it, but a very low bridge. Yeah. And it's quite a hot spot, apparently. Yeah. And what he said, that they had to get the helicopter out with a heat detector to find the bits. And I was like, hey.
BTP have a really horrible job, because they have... that's what they literally have to go out and do.
And that's what he said. There were just people all around with bags, like picking up bits. Oh, God.
Yeah, it's really... We had... Because obviously there's a train line that runs through Bath. So we had train deaths were not unusual.
It's horrible, isn't it? I mean, obviously the mental health conversation that I've repeatedly been having on the podcast, and it's a horrible, horrible situation that somebody would get to that point. But personally, I'd always think of all the ways to do it. Some of them are just horrific. But I guess when you're at that stage, you just don't care anymore.
It's a really difficult one, because there there are certainly lots that I can say I heard about or I was associated with that they could see no other way. And I'm like, it's just awful. It's really, really awful. And one of the last ones I went to was a train one. We went because this person was a missing person initially. So they'd sent a text message to their partner who'd just broken up with them, saying, I'm going to go and end my life. And they'd sent them a picture of where they were. So we knew where to look. And we went, and 9 times out of 10, if someone sends a message like that, they're not actually going to go and do it. They went and did it, and they'd sent this message to their next partner, I suppose. And the ex-partner had got there before we got there.
Oh, Christ.
And I just felt so sorry for this ex-partner because
it's terrible to put that. I mean, it's terrible for the person that's lost their life.
I'm like, I don't know
to put that on somebody.
What position they were in life that they felt, okay, well, you've broken up with me. I've got to go and do this now. This is the only way I can manage with what's going on. But I'm gonna tell you that's where I'm gonna go. Effectively, give you like X marks the spot. This is where I'm gonna be, and for that partner to then see it,
it's horrific for everyone involved. Really is. Yeah, it's tragic. It's tragic in any circumstance. It really is. I understand the dark humour side of it because, like you say, when you're dealing with that day in, day out, if you were to take, and it's worth pointing out actually, because people could look and think, oh, that's wrong, that there shouldn't be any humour involved. But when you're in the services that have to deal with this potentially on a daily basis, if you were to take that to heart, you wouldn't last a week.
You wouldn't.
It would absolutely destroy you. So you have to build boundaries, you have to build walls, and those are coping mechanisms.
They really are.
And I think everyone in the emergency services, whether it's police, fire, ambulance, probably all develop the same thing.
They are. There's a real like, although you're all different services, and like the police will talk trash about ambulance, or ambulance will wait round the corner for us. They won't go first. They'll wait for the police to get there. And like, there's that little kind of, not rivalry, because you're all there to do the same kind of thing effectively, but there's a little bit of banter between them all. But there's also that understanding, and because you're dealing with similar things, you do have that same kind of humor about it, and you're all there just trying to help everyone and get along to the next
100%,
job, really.
Yeah, it's all part of the vital part of what the services do. So yeah, it's not to be critiqued.
No, and I would say of all of the people that I worked with in the police, yes, there were bad jokes and really dark humour around things, but I don't think I could even tell you the people that I worked alongside that any of them were bad people. The people out there on the ground in response cars, on foot patrol, they are really good, hardworking people. And they
important
were
to remember, isn't it?
Yeah,
they're people.
They are.
They're not robots in a uniform. They're just like you and me, but they've chosen a career path that has taken them into some horrific circumstances at times.
And most of them will have joined the job because they wanted to help people.
Absolutely.
And then they end up in this really difficult, sticky situation where they can't really help in the way that they'd kind of hoped that they would.
I mean, look, there's bad apples. There's always bad apples in any career, walk of life, walking down the street.
Higher up the chain.
So, but unfortunately, again, it's human nature to focus on the negatives. And there's been very high-profile negative cases against the police recently, but again, it's important to put it in context that that's the one in 1,000, 1 in 100,000, whatever it might be. I
found as well, the police were really good at learning from their mistakes. So there was a high-profile case in Avon and Somerset that effectively sparked this really positive line of training around like your unconscious bias. So we had, I think it was only a day session in the end, which like I could have quite happily sat down and listened to more about it, that just sort of served to highlight that this call had come in, and the first call was from the chap who was then consequently arrested. So they called up. I'm at my partner's house. Everybody's banging on the door. Blah, blah, blah. And then the next call that comes in is black man out in the street with a knife. And of course, everyone goes, knife? That's the first one. That's what we've got to go to. And this chap was, I think he was like the only black guy on this estate. And he effectively got singled out as being, he was the victim, but he got identified as the assailant. He was the man who'd had the knife. Everybody else who called up and said it. He got arrested and treated horribly.
Really?
Like he had so many, I don't want to say issues, but he had such an awful time the way he was treated by the police. And they recognized it and they went, oh my God, we have done so badly. We have really cocked it up. And rather than just go, yeah, we cocked it up and that's it, we'll just move on. They learnt from it and they went, okay, so why did we cock up? Why did we go knife? That's the most important thing. Rather than looking at the time of everything coming in. And actually his was the first phone call. Because you've got access to all the information. Look at the history of the address. And you can see that he's the one who's been getting all the grief from the other neighbours.
Right.
But unfortunately someone went knife and he just got identified as the assailant, and that was
it's good to hear that there was adjustments made in a positive context. Everyone fucks up.
They do. And I think if you can hold your hands up and learn from it, and for the most part in my experience that is what the police did. They knew they cocked up sometimes, but they are always trying to do better.
Yeah. That's good. That's good to hear and know from somebody that's been in your position. What I want to ask you about, because I'm not sure, because we had this conversation briefly before we started recording. I don't know if we've skipped past the relevance of it.
I know, I got a bit carried away, didn't I?
Section 28?
Section 28, yeah.
Okay. Have we gone past where that's relevant?
I mean, technically it's relevant. It's relevant anytime.
Because I don't know what that is.
It's not in relation to the police. So Section 28 is a piece of legislation that was brought in around 1988. It's an old, lovely leftover from Maggie Thatcher. There's a really popular little video that goes along with it about Maggie Thatcher giving a speech. I think it's at the Conservative Party, that children are being taught they have an inalienable right to be gay. So it was basically legislation that was brought about that...
Inalienable right to be gay.
Yeah. That it was aimed more for local authorities, that they weren't to promote being homosexual. They weren't to actively allow it, effectively. But it got taken up by schools, that schools weren't allowed to teach about same-sex relationships. They weren't allowed to... I mean, they took up basically that you couldn't talk about it. There was no discussion about it. It wasn't a thing. So all sex education is around heterosexuality. It's a really horrible, archaic rule that was... So it was brought in, as I say, in 1988. It was finally abolished, gotten rid of, in... Did I say 2003? 2003. It's really not that long ago.
No, it's not. Yeah.
And in fact, it was still used in Kent Council until 2010. So any child, any young person in the education system who was questioning their identity at any point from the late 80s onwards, after this awful scare around gay people and AIDS, you're all going to die. You're not allowed to talk about it. No one in education, in authority, is allowed to talk to you about it because they'd be seen to be actively promoting that lifestyle. So I'm like a year younger than you, I think.
84, I was.
I'm 85.
Okay.
So I was at school at a time when I had no idea when I was at school that this was actually a thing. I didn't know.
I've never heard of it.
No.
So, yeah, this is new to me.
It's one of those things that I discovered in later life where I was like, because I was quite happy with my identity being gay. I had no problem with it. But I was always like...
If you don't mind me asking, Sarah, like what have you always known? And was there a coming out? Have you always been? I don't even like that expression, but how was the whole process for you? If you don't mind me asking that.
No, I don't mind you asking at all. It was for me. I can't say there was anything negative. My family were excellent about it.
Were you openly gay at school? Or
I mean, I don't know as if you could go and ask anyone that I was at school with if they knew I was gay, but I certainly didn't make a secret of it, I don't think, when I was from about 14, maybe.
So I guess, because it's that weird thing, isn't there, I guess, of what age or whatever do kids become sexually aware of their attraction, maybe? So was that like day one for you in terms of as soon as you became aware of your attraction, it was...
There was probably a little muddled area in the middle with the crossover because, as I say, there was no talk about it. It wasn't. There were no role models as such. There wasn't. There was maybe the odd character on TV that would be gay, but they'd have a really small storyline and they'd be killed off, or the relationship would break up. It would never be a positive relationship that you'd see. It would never be something that would flourish. There was always a kind of a negative tilt to it.
I think the awareness there now is fantastic. I had this conversation with Matt, whose episode isn't out yet. Big shout out to Matt Willis. And we were discussing the fact that I guess today's day and age is the best there has been in terms of awareness and acceptance for people being gay. And therefore, I guess for the kids that are coming up and probably not even aware of their sexuality yet, but as they become aware of it, there's no better time than current sort of times for them to get support or ask the questions without the prejudices that potentially you experienced. I think Matt said he was 42, so similar sorts of age brackets that we were in, and his experience was horrific, to be honest, listening to him.
And from the little snippet I've heard, it sounds like it would have been effectively Section 28 that was to blame for the way that he was treated.
I've not heard of Section 28. I don't know if Matt has.
No, I'd be really interested to know, actually.
But, I'll ask or drop him a message yourself. But the way that we discussed it, it was presented that it was either the head teacher or year head, had essentially written a letter home to his parents after he had openly come out as gay to say that it must not be discussed. It must be kept, to themselves. And the worst part of that was that Matt was then withdrawn because he wanted to be a teacher. He was then withdrawn from the tutorage program. So he was essentially told that he wasn't allowed to mix with younger children because, to quote the school, they had to protect the younger children.
From our gay agenda.
Absolutely horrendous. And good on Matt. You'll find this out on the episode, which will be out already by the time this comes out. So not any spoilers. But Matt at that stage actually went with the letter, confronted the year head.
Oh, nice work.
And basically said, look, in his words, I'm a puff, not a paedophile. And left the school at that stage. But again, he shouldn't have had to do that.
No, he really shouldn't.
And it was horrific to think that he had been put in that category, sort of denied his authentic self, as it were. Some cliche statements I'm making here, but that whole it's just horrific. I can't imagine being told, well, that's who you are. Okay, you've told us now, but you're not allowed to tell anyone.
Yeah, put it back in the box. Don't tell anyone else about it.
And talk about things that are terrible for mental health. But absolutely horrific. So, but the fact that you're now saying there was actually legislation that kind of instructed them, maybe that was why the school acted that way.
I suspect it was probably part and parcel of it. But to think that like 20 odd years ago, it had only just stopped.
I appreciate you bringing it to my attention, to be honest. One of the things I love about doing these podcasts is I learn. And I've learned that. I've learned, I guess, some of the history of the situation around being gay and the battles that people have had to go through. So it's eye-opening for me.
I think it's one... Like I always used to say, I don't want to be a flag waving gay because I'm like, it's just a bit, But actually, there's a reason to be a flag waving gay because of things like that.
The persecution,
things like, what is it? Ireland, was it in 2020? So Ireland only started allowing same-sex marriages 4 years ago.
Yeah.
It was 2014 here.
The year we got engaged.
Yeah, because that was why Lauren proposed, was because it had only just become it was civil partnerships before then.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about true equality, why are we not allowed to have the same thing? And that, again, 100%. that's a decade ago. That's nothing.
No. This is it, isn't it? I mean, it really is very recent history.
Yeah.
And you're talking about humanity being on the planet and it's weird, actually. I mean, I'm not going to go too deep into this subject, but we've kind of devolved at some stage, because if you look at like Roman culture and history, it was very open. People were openly bisexual and gay.
Yeah.
But then at some stage, it got really,
I mean, if you want to go really into it, like, there were more than two genders way before then as well.
Okay. When was the first?
So there's instances of more than two genders in lots of, particularly Native American cultures. It's still a prevalent thing.
Okay.
There's instances of them in so many places. It's not.
I know Egyptian culture was also very open to various things, wasn't it? So it's weird how, as I say, you've got those societies that were very open, and then what happened to?
I'll say it for you, Lauren.
Yeah,
Christianity.
So Lauren in the background over there, religion is to blame. I'm going to throw that one out.
I'm really sorry if anyone's religious. I don't have a problem with you as an individual. I myself am not religious, but Christianity and Catholicism, man, they got a lot to answer for.
True.
You can equate the persecution of many different groups of people to the introduction of that kind of religion to a community.
Let's be honest, Sarah, if you look at most of the wars and atrocities in the world, a lot of it can be pulled back to religious ideologies.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's one of those, is it? So I'm not religious myself. Openly, never have been. Devoutly atheist, I guess I was. I used to be very, if I'm honest, actually, I used to be very anti-religion. And because I was so anti-religion, I've always been one that if I'm going to disagree with something, I'm going to learn about it.
Yeah.
I'm not one to just disagree with religion, just throw that out there. So I did. And at some stage in my life, I don't know what it was or why it happened, but I did have a slight perspective shift in terms of, I'm still not religious whatsoever, but people that follow a religion, if it, the way I look at it now is if it genuinely improves their life, and if they're, it gives them a set of morals to live by that improves them as a person, I'm all for it.
Yeah,
I'm all for it. The people that practice religion and it improves their quality of life in whatever way, whether that gives them peace of mind, purpose, or it just gives them the feeling of the not being watched. But if it gives them something that keeps them on a correct moral track because they believe that they're going to be judged at some point, I'm all for it. It's whatever. I guess if I were to have to believe in anything, it would be good and evil, I guess. There's good in the world, there's evil in the world, and there's a mixture of the two. And if religion keeps people more to the good side, then crack on. Unfortunately, it also pushes people way over the other side.
Yeah. So. It's a shame when it's used as justification for behaviours and acts that really aren't justifiable.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that was a great history lesson for me, to be honest. So I'm glad I asked the question, though.
Yeah, great.
I'm glad I asked
I'm really glad you did too.
Yeah, because I'll probably use that again. I genuinely didn't know, but it kind of makes sense now. Because this was only like 4 days ago, so it's coincidental that you guys have come in so close together. I was horrified with what Matt said, and I thought that it would have just been maybe one personal vendetta from one year head mistress, whatever. But if there was government backing behind it, pushing them that way, not that vindicates that person, but it gives it a little bit more sense and substance, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you think prior to that, people would have lost their jobs for being gay,
and they would do now.
Yeah.
Lost it. I've gone off in a different track. I was going to say people would lose their job. If people were to treat people as Matt was treated now, I mean, they'd be burnt at the stake.
Yeah.
and rightly so. But yeah, you're quite right. And I mean, I guess you touch on many things, the armed forces. And,
Yeah.
I mean, the police, did they have a
I
no gay policy at any stage?
I mean, someone please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not aware of any. And I know there was someone who transitioned whilst they were serving in Avon and Somerset, because I remember the email going out saying that they were now going to be identified as, they were DC, I think, but as whatever they were changing their name to. And I was like, this is brilliant.
Yeah.
The force were like positively behind them. That was fab. But yeah, I'm not aware of any sort of legislation that would have been around it. But having said that, you could now have had WPCs up until some point in the 1900s, wasn't it?
Yeah, true. Yeah, and again, I mean, there used to be like even if you were male getting into the police, there used to be like height.
There was,
height rules. It was 6 foot plus,
yeah,
and things like that. And I must admit, if I'm honest, there are certain situations that I've been in with the police where, to be honest with you, the people that have attended the situation were not cut out for what was going on, because there were some heavy situations. And on one particular occasion that comes to mind, again, it was bailiff days, there was a circumstance where a particular group of people had got very upset. Group of people are often on the wrong side of the law, and there was about 12, 15 of them with bats, bars, dogs, the lot. And what they sent out was a WPC and a PCSO, who were very physically not imposing whatsoever. And I'm not saying that that's everything. Obviously, they've got the equipment and the training, but it needed a fucking riot squad there.
It can be sometimes it's a real benefit to have a woman there, because
this was not one of those occasions.
Like sometimes it's really good because some guys will see a woman and they'll just be like, oh no, I won't. No. But then there are other times where I agree.
It was bizarre. So it had kicked off because I was there and me and my driver were there. So all the negative energy was at us. And then the police turned up, and then it was all at them.
Yeah.
And then it actually progressed into a stage where me and my driver were sheltering the police woman and the PCSO because I was scared for their safety. And I'm thinking, I've got a shot here, but
that's a really poor call to send out those two individuals.
It was. And apparently, again, shortages. Apparently, they were the only people available.
Yeah.
And it actually, that situation resulted in me being escorted out of an entire county because of the people we'd upset. So, yeah, it was a story for another day, Sara. But, that was one of those where the police lady actually said, look, we can't handle this. It's going to go very south very quickly. Please, even though you're in the right being here, please can you leave? And we'll escort you, and we'll actually escort you out of the county because these people have threatened to burn you alive, and they probably will. So, yeah, that was a fun day.
Yeah, sometimes you have to know when you're not going to win the battle.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, like I saw the police car come in with the blues on and thought, oh, brilliant, we're in here. And then the doors opened and I was like, no, please, no. But yeah, so I can kind of understand some of the old rules. I think there's got to be a mix, hasn't there?
I think a mixture is a really good way, because there will be, sometimes you'll need physical skills, and sometimes you'll need some verbal skills that perhaps a small petite female officer is going to be the perfect one for. Like, equally, it could sometimes be the massive strapping bloke who's going to be ideal for it. But versatility on a team like that is really good.
Yeah, and the balance, isn't it? That's what it is. But it's the evolution of things these days. So, where have we gotten to, Sara? I know there were. So
we've gone on a right stroll.
We have, and this is what I love about the podcast. We go off on tangents. So we've covered section 28. Thank you very much for that. I do
You're
appreciate
very welcome
the knowledge.
for your education.
Honestly, I love that. It's been the highlight for me, because I'm like, right, I'll grab onto that. And next time somebody talks about that kind of situation, I'll be like, that's probably because of section 28. I'll give you credit. Don't worry.
Thanks.
So I know there's a subject that you really want to cover, which is the adoption situation.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give the floor to you on that.
Okay.
And I'll thrown the word out there so people know where we're going to go. But do you want to explain about that whole situation?
Yeah. So around about 2019, Lauren and I came to the decision that we wanted to have a family, and that adoption was the route that we were gonna take. For people that don't know, there are kind of different avenues that you can go. You can go down the local authority route, which we were kind of told you'll get less help. You'll likely get a younger child. But yeah, less assistance if there's issues, less training, less input, that kind of thing.
Was there an age you were looking for?
No, there wasn't. No. I mean, I was like, I don't really want a baby. I'm not a baby kind of person. I don't like see them and coo over them. But we were quite happy to have a slightly older child. Yeah. That wasn't going to be an issue. So we went down, there's various charitable agencies that run adoption programs. And that is, generally speaking, where the older, when I say old, I mean like 2 to 5 generally.
Yeah. I was glad you again, for clarification, I know nothing about this subject. So I will ask questions as ignorantly as possible because one, I ain't got a clue. And two, I think, well, if I haven't got a clue, there's probably quite a few people listening that are in a similar position. Yeah. So I'll forgive any ignorance.
No, it's fine.
I have no idea.
But it's awful when you say over 2, a child is old.
Yeah.
So yeah, the older children over 2, generally the ones with more complex needs, you could probably say, will end up being potentially adopted through various charitable agencies. The charitable agencies, I can't speak for all of them, but the one that we chose to go with, we had a really positive experience with them in terms of the training that they gave, the level of support that they proposed that they would offer afterwards sounded really good. And we were like, this sounds like the better route for us. We were prepared to take more challenging things. That was fine. We were like, yeah, okay, we'll do this. So we started doing our training right around COVID. So we did lots of
again. So, I mean, first of all, the first thing I'll say is I didn't actually know that there was any other avenue. I just assumed that if you were going to adopt a child, it would have to be somehow through a government agency, like the UK adoption section.
Yeah.
I don't know whatever they're called. Yeah. But I just assumed there'd be. I didn't know that there was any other way to adopt a child.
No. So we went with a charity called Action for Children.
Okay. I think I've heard of them actually, but I didn't know that was what they did.
They do various different things. They now no longer support adoption because of funding cuts.
Okay.
But at the time they were still doing it. So it's about, I mean, it varies, but it's about a 2-year kind of process. So you have this stage 1 and stage 2. Oh, wow. Stage 1 is unpicking your life to an absolute minute detail. Was it? What was in stage 1? Yeah, but wasn't that part of unpicking your life as well? Maybe. Yeah. I thought there were like questions. Yes, it was like, what was your mother's pregnancy like? It was
Sorry,
really, what? Yeah. So you have obviously if you don't, but yeah, I remember going to my mum and going, what was your pregnancy like with me, mum? Because that's the kind of question they ask. But it's to gauge sort of, so your mum's pregnancy will give an indication of potentially the kind of stresses that you might have been exposed to when you were in utero. These things they have a relevance to the kind of person that you are afterwards. It's all kinds of questions to just find out the kind of person you are. They dig into everything, but for a good purpose, obviously.
Yeah, I guess at this point, I'm in two minds. One side of me is thinking that's really good that they do these stringent checks, and two, that sounds fucking mental. Like, what difference would it make that your mum had a whatever pregnancy? How's that going to affect your qualities as a potential adoptive parent?
Yeah, but they then go into like your childhood and what you remember of how you were parented, because how you were parented will impact how you then parent a child. So I found it a really cathartic experience because it gave me the opportunity to go to my parents and say, what was your childhood like? Yeah. How did you find having me? All these kinds of questions.
Did you feel, I'm putting myself in what would be your shoes, did you feel a bit on edge as to the answers you gave? Like, shit, am I saying the wrong thing here?
No, I can't say that I did, because I always, I mean, maybe that's just me being naive. I went wanting to understand, because I wanted to go into this process being a completely open book to prepare ourselves as best we could for the challenge that was about to come.
Okay.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
So I found it really positive. Like,
I mean, just to say that actually, with adoption is a unique sort of challenging way to become a parent. So to anybody that does adopt, it's incredible. It's an incredible thing to want to do and do. But yeah, it must provide unique challenges.
It does. Yes. So after we'd done all the paperwork, digging into everything, understanding who you are as a person, how you're going to function, how all these things are going to affect you, you then do. It used to be face-to-face training, but we did it online. Where
sorry, I interrupted when you said about training.
No, it's all right.
What?
So the training is, was it? Yeah. So it's called prep training, and it's kind of like a short introduction to child psychology, really.
Okay.
So there's a real good introduction to child psychology. There's so it's over 5 days, so it's quite intense. There's a lot of information. There are examples of like a challenging type behavior that sometimes you might see. They throw a lot of information at you, and I probably am really selling it short on how much information they tell you right now, because I frankly can't recall half of it right now. But they give you loads, and that I say is really positive, but they probably still don't even prepare you enough, because you're like, nah. But I remember we got the list, and there was one example of a child. I think it was a made up one, but the child was being really disruptive. They were doing X, Y, Z. They were being completely, and we were like, well, that's all of them together. You won't get everything. Like, maybe you'll get a couple of things going wrong, but it won't be that bad. That was a real underestimation from my part.
Right. Okay.
So we got through all the training stage, and then you go to you effectively have your social worker. So you have a social worker, the couple. They take all the information that they've collated, and they write this great big report upon you, and they say this, these are the reasons we think they'll be really, really good adoptive parents. They've had these challenges, but they've faced them in this way. So for being an autistic person, that was when we really kind of explored it, because to understand the things that would affect me meant that I might find some things about a child really challenging, but my need and desire for a real structured routine would be really beneficial for an adoptive child. So there are aspects of my personality that would be really beneficial, but there are other areas that perhaps I would need more scaffolding and more support from our social worker and anybody else. So would you say that's a fair description? Yeah. So that's all collated into this big form. You go to an approval panel, which is some social workers, some other adopters, as various people. They read through it all. They ask you some questions, and they go, "Yeah, you'll be a really good adoptive parent. You'll be fine. You'll be great." And then you get like a document that comes through that basically says, yes, you've been given access to something called Link Maker, which can only be described as, this is going to sound awful, but it's like a dating site with children on it. Yeah.
Okay. Like, yeah.
It is as traumatic as it sounds, because there are.
See, I was gonna, admittedly, what I was gonna say there was like Tinder for kids, but then I thought, no, I can't say that, because
it is
so take away the attraction and any of that side of things, but essentially for an adoption, like swiping for
yes, there's this great long list. There'll be a little picture, and the name and the age, a little bit of spiel, and then you can go into it and you can find some more information. If you like the look of, if you think that you might be able to support this particular child, you can then express an interest. So it's really weird.
It sounds like a council house that you're applying for, really.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess as perverse as it does sound, I guess there's got to be a way of doing it. Like, I've got to do it somehow.
It has to be done somehow, and this is the way that currently, or when we did it anyway, that it was being done, and it's I mean, I thought I'd seen some bad things, but you go down through this list and there's like, there were 500 on it when we started. And that's nationwide. And I mean, it's all like, some of them were awful. So you only get a little snippet of information, but you could tell, because there's kind of like, it's not really code words, but there would be things that would be said that, like, your social worker, you go, oh, I may be interested in this profile. And then your social worker goes, no, that's code for this, this, and this. No, you're not going there. Wow. So they guide you quite a lot. But so you get access to this link maker and you can express an interest and whatnot. And we were maybe on there a week, not even that. And we had a social worker approach us with this profile of a sibling pair and go, we think you might be suited for this sibling pair. And we looked, and I mean, they stole my heart, I have to say. When I saw them, I was like, yeah, okay. And so then you have a little conversation, and then you go, okay, can we have their report? And then you get their report, and then you get all of it. Then you get the full breadth of everything awful that you can imagine was in their report. And you're like, oh, okay. But yeah, we can do this. We're prepared for this. And you talk about it with your social worker, and you have meetings, and they're like, yeah, okay, this is fine. And then you, once you've got sort of that level of interest and you've spoken to their social worker, and then it's, yes, okay. So then you have another meeting, which is called a matching panel, where more social workers and independent people all come together, and they go, we've got this panel, this pair of people that would like to adopt. We've got this prospective child or sibling group or whatever. Yes, that's a good match. That's really good. And we had that. We had the yes, this is a good match. How old were the
siblings? Sorry?
They were 5 at the time.
Okay, so yeah, quite old then, essentially.
Yeah. So we had the yes, and then it kind of goes quite quickly then that you then you write this book for the child or children, like introducing yourself and your family and your home. It's a very strange way, really. And I remember we had like a secret meeting. So they were not from our local area. We drove to their local area, and their foster carers took them out for a day trip, and we stalked them around this park. And we're like, oh, that's them. That's them. Yeah, it was all planned, obviously. Everybody knows. Yeah. It's like, they're going to be here, you're going to be there, and this is what we're going to do. So we're talking to their foster carers.
Essentially observe from a distance.
Yes. Yeah. So we did that. And then we must have had introductions on weekends, mustn't we? So then you go and meet them in the flesh. And their social worker and their foster carers, most of the time, will have sort of started to prepare them that they'll be going to their forever home. This is going to be your forever family. Yeah. So they'll have done some legwork into introducing you. They'll have had the book that identifies you and your home and all these things. And then you go and you have like this weird play date in like a soft play area where they go with the foster carers, and then you go and meet them, and it's like, this is really strange, going into this like ball pit with these 2 children that don't actually know us. And then like, yeah, it's really strange.
I bet it was incredibly nerve-wracking.
Yes, it's nerve-wracking. I mean, because you're like, oh, you kind of think you're being interviewed by the foster carers. You don't really know how the children are going to react. It's very strange. But we did a number of play dates over consecutive weekends, and then you go into something called intense intros. So we went for about 10 days to the local authority where they were living, and you effectively go every day for the first sort of 5 days to foster carers. And like, so you might go spend a couple of hours there with them, go to the local park or something, and then you stop. Then the next day is a longer time each time. You'll do a nighttime routine, so you'll see the bedtime routine and all of that. And then the next sort of the second block of that 10 days, 2 weeks, you will be at a location where the children will come to you So you will start taking over more of that care. Ours, shout out to this local authority, I really don't like them anymore. We drove up there on the first day that we were supposed to start all of this. They're supposed to have sorted you out your accommodation. We got up there and by 4 p.m, we had no accommodation sorted. And it wasn't a huge distance from our home. It was a long way. This was really unsettling for us. And we're supposed to be like giving all of our time to getting to know these children. And I'm like, where are we sleeping? So we got put up into a hotel for 2 days. Bearing in mind the second part, they're supposed to come to you. You can't take them to a hotel. So then they organised for us this flat in what can only be described as the most dive bomb area of town.
Okay.
Like we had them for the second part of this block of time, and we took them back to this apartment, and it had gated parking. So we'd gone into park and we had to keep them in the car because there was someone out in the car park who was absolutely bladdered, going hell for leather shouting at someone else now. I was like, bearing in mind what these 2 children have seen, we're not going to take them out there. That's not, how is this encouraging them that they're going to be safe?
Yeah.
So there were a lot of complaints to the local authority about how they messed that one up. But we did that sort of block of 10 days, and then we come home. We had about 2 days off, and then the foster carers come down to us with the children.
If I can just jump in there, up until that stage, how was that for you? Like, how did that go?
I mean, it was mixed. So, I mean, obviously it's really exciting because you're starting to build what you consider is going to be your forever family. These 2 little ones are going to come into your life, into your home, and you've got all these visions of what your future's going to look like. It comes with huge challenging moments because we started to discover that one of them really struggled with transitions. So the point at which we were like, okay, well, we've got to go back to the foster carers now. They went off the hook, like complete savage, in like emptied the kitchen cupboards out. It's like just mental, just went completely bonkers. And you're just sort of like, oh my God, how do I support this little person who's clearly got a lot going on in their body right now?
It's quite eye-opening, actually, Sarah, because if I'm honest, so 2 things. First of all, I don't know why, but I assumed that once you apply for adoption, I don't know, maybe you tick an age box where you're like, I don't know, I'd like a baby, or I'd like a 2-year-old, like a 4-year-old, whatever. I didn't realise that there was any choosing. I kind of envisaged a social worker turning up and going, here's your child.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what happens in fostering more so. Right. You get approved for a particular age range.
Yeah.
And like 1 or 2 children in this age range. That is what we were approved for.
Okay.
So then when you're looking on Linkmaker, you tend to then look for 1 or 2 children in that age bracket.
I mean, that's eye-opening. I didn't know that was a thing. So that's another thing I've learned today. And the other thing I think worth making a point of is, I guess I've probably got a bit of a romanticised vision of adoption, where
we all do.
You've got 2 people that, for whatever reason, haven't got or just simply want it, because I was going to say haven't got or can't have their own children. But in reality, you also have people that have got their own children that then adopt. So for whatever personal reasons people adopt, I guess I kind of had this romantic, happy, smiley vision of it all. But the reality is, I guess, children that are put up for adoption, certainly the older they've got and the more stimulus that they've had, quite often come from very tragic backgrounds. So not only are you adopting a child, you're potentially adopting a very troubled, traumatized child.
That is pretty much what you will find on Linkmaker, is just... Yeah.
And that's, I guess it's just immediately changed my perception of the process. Yeah. So it was just worth pointing that out and making a statement.
And I think it's true. It's part of the reason why I wanted to talk about it, was because I think I was very much of that initially, that it's going to be this wonderful wonderful experience, and you're like having these children, it's going to be so lovely, they're going to be so grateful, and you are that daft that you kind of think that you forget that they've had a period of time before that where who knows what might have happened. And I was definitely naive to that.
Is there, I don't know if you even know this, but is there more of a demand for babies because of that, where it's like, well, if we adopt a baby, they haven't had potentially the trauma that is going to play out in their behaviour as, say, a 5-year-old would?
So I think we were kind of steered by our social worker that when they're a little bit older, you'll things will have been seen that you'll know potentially the extent of the challenges that you might face. Whereas if you were to adopt a very, very small baby, you wouldn't necessarily know if you were going to have things like fetal alcohol syndrome or sort of other cognitive issues that won't show up until much later on in life.
Right.
So whilst it might seem like you're going to get a problem-free child, I really don't want to say it like that. I don't think that's everyone's experience. I can only speak for our individual experience, obviously, but I don't think everyone that's had a baby has a smooth ride, and I don't think everybody that's had an older child has had a difficult ride.
Okay, so, it's just an interesting thing to ask, really, about the process. So, sorry, again, I'm interrupting, but please carry on.
So they came down to us then, foster carers, and then it kind of goes in the reverse. The foster carers spend less and less time, and that was only over about 5 days, wasn't it? And then they're just there, they're in your house, and you're like, and
okay, and that's how quick that goes.
So
you do really, your bit up there, and then they
really
come to you,
quick.
And then they kind of withdraw, and you're left with your adoptive children.
And I mean, I can see why it's done that way. And often, so we were kind of warmed up to this idea of you'll get this honeymoon period, like there'll be maybe a couple of weeks where everything's kind of fine, like they're trying to look all nice and angelic and all happy. We had no honeymoon period. It from sort of like the day that the foster carers returned to where they lived, the kids were very unsettled. And we kind of expected that anyway. We were like, oh, well, it's a shame we didn't get that honeymoon period, but we weren't expecting it to be all plain sailing. But we had, I mean, it wasn't extreme violence to start with, was it? But there was a lot of dysregulation from the outset. It's gonna sound like, because you're like 5-year-old children, like how much damage do they cause?
Listen, I've got 2 kids. And at 5 years old, my daughter earned the nickname Reagan.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm remarried, and don't get me wrong, my wife and my daughter have got a great relationship. But there was like a particular family holiday that we went on where she earned it, and she literally became the kid out of The Exorcist at 5. Yeah. It's a weird age.
Yeah.
And I had it with my son as well. So I warned my wife at the time. I was like, look, it's a tough age for you. I don't think it gets enough credit, because they're kind of like little people, but with zero emotional regulation, and you cannot reason with them.
And hold on to the thought that yours were emotionally attached to you and your partner.
Yeah.
That we didn't have. So these little balls of fury is probably the best way to describe it, came into our house and unleashed all kinds of, I mean, well, I've got pictures of Lauren's arms with like bite marks, like numerous bite marks all up her arm. The destruction of property. So I often joked that we got assaulted more in that stage than I ever did in the police. In fact, I never got assaulted in the police by anybody else, thankfully. But these 2 children just had such chaos.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, for me, it was probably the most awful time. I managed about 3 weeks kind of holding it together. And then I got to the point where I was so incredibly overwhelmed, because we were there were issues at night, there was struggles in the day, there was the violence, there was like complete dysregulation. And like when I say dysregulation, I mean like completely flying off the handle. And like if there was a I don't want to say a normal child, but if there was a child who was like emotionally attached to their birth parent having a bit of a meltdown, you can understand it, and that parent can probably surmise what needs to be done. But when you don't know those children from birth, and those children don't have that attachment to you, you're kind of feeling around in the dark of how to best support them. You've only got so much information, like you've read information about their family history, but you've not lived it all. You don't really know the best way. So you're doing the best you can. As I say, by 3 weeks in, I wasn't really eating. I probably wasn't sleeping very well. I was completely fried because I was just like, what has come into our home? This is just terrifying. And then most of the violence was directed at Lauren. I don't know if that's because, so for people that can't see, Lauren is taller than me. So whether, and has short hair. So whether Lauren was like identified as like the male figure to point the violence at, I don't know. But it all got sort of thrown at her, really. One of them was more physically violent than the other. The other one tended to be like destruction of property a bit more. So I found that really difficult as well. Like we had patio doors smashed and all sorts. Like, yeah, it was pretty mad. And was it 3 weeks in then that we got the assistance? Yeah. So from 3 weeks in, and we were on our phone to the social worker like all the time going, oh, this is happening, sending pictures of the damage and the bruises and bite marks. Yeah, you've got, every time anything happens, you've got to tell them what's going on, basically.
Anyway, so yeah, absolutely.
So we were always speaking to them, always updating them. So in that respect, really good. But I got to this point anyway where I was like, I can't cope with this. And they kind of went, we think this is getting a little dangerous. So they managed to get 2 therapists to come and spend time doing family therapy effectively in the house. This is financed by the local authority from where the children came. So bearing in mind they're living with us, 2 therapists, 3 times a week, 18 hours a week, was it? Yeah. So you can imagine the bill that the local authority was having to foot for that. But the fact that the therapists came and they went, well, we think we need to be here 3 times a week. We need to put this much time into trying to help keep this family together. That was from professionals. So they were coming 3 times a week. God, I'm going to miss so much out of this story. About 6 weeks in, I'd started to return back to work about 4 days a week. And around about the same time school started. So there would be this block in the morning where I'd get ready for work, and then my mum would come over, and mum would do the school run with Lauren to take them to school, which was very rarely smooth. Most of the time, Lauren would get kicked, bitten, spat at, trying to get them to school.
Yeah, someone else had to be there because it wasn't safe.
Yeah, so we had to schedule it so that there was always 2 adults effectively. So they started school and we were kind of under this impression. Everybody had kind of said school will make it easier. School did not make it easier. There was an escalation of behaviour at home, really. And I think they go to school and they could put on the mask of being really, I mean, they were lovely children. They are lovely children. But they would put the mask on. They would behave and they would manage their emotional dysregulation whilst they were there, but then they would come out from school. They only managed half days. They never did a whole day. They would come out and they would go
explode.
Yeah, they would explode. So most often, like Lauren would pick them up. She'd maybe have half an hour where she'd be on her own, and then we'd either have her dad there, or one of the therapists would be there, so that there were always 2 adults, because you couldn't be a single adult looking after them. It was really a lot. And it sort of went on for a period of time. And one of the therapists, I mean, they were both excellent. They were really, really good. And they were on our side entirely. And one of them sort of went, school's not helping. School's making this worse. So they went to school. They discussed the issues with school, and school were like, and kind of brushed it all off. They were not supportive at all. And putting it all in a nutshell, we got to about 4 months, lots of thousands of pounds worth of damage, like so many bruises all over my wife. And even the therapist went, I don't think you can continue doing this. I think it's dangerous. I don't think it's going to work. There's obviously a whole lot more to it, but effectively I'd checked out already. Like, I was just roboting, trying to survive. And Lauren had to do so much. She was working her socks off, trying to support them in the way that they needed, but they couldn't. I don't know whether the relationship was just so threatening that they couldn't do it. They couldn't allow someone to care for them, to love them in that way. It was so threatening to them. So we called it quits effectively, and we said we can't do this. It's because they'd turned 6. They were getting to an age where, so there were times when they had to be physically restrained for safety. We were shown techniques by the counsellors of how to do things. Certainly Lauren was. So everything like this had been done, and we just got to the point where I was like, oh, I can't envisage how in a year we'll safely be able to do that.
I can imagine. I can't imagine. I've never been in the position, but it just sounds tragic all round, to be honest, Sarah. I can see how painful it is for you now to discuss it. And I can imagine the potential feelings as to guilt, feeling like you were giving up on the situation. But from an outsider sitting and listening to that, it sounds horrific for everyone involved.
It is, yeah.
It's important, I guess, to remember that they're children, children that have probably had a horrific start to life. But just for you guys, that sounds like hell on earth.
I don't want at any point anyone to think those 2 kids, they were loved, and we desperately wanted it to work. And I do not consider it their fault at all. I made a point at a few, during various meetings that went on, where I sort of was they have been failed so many times. They were known to their local social services for a long time before they were removed. They were not the first children in that relationship. There is I can't even go so far as to say I blame the birth parents, because the birth parents themselves are part of this cycle.
Yeah.
They had also been exposed to awful things. And they had all been failed by the services for however many years, both parents, and that cycle had just continued. And those 2 children were also then really affected by that failure, and then that failure affected us too, because
I think that's where in my mind, the tragedy lies kind of there, really, in that I don't know the children. Obviously, I've never met them, but I've just met you 2 guys, and you 2 seem like such genuine people that wanted to help. And it almost feels like almost a missed opportunity, because you guys wanted that, and there's probably some children out there somewhere that would have fit in with you guys really well, and you could have given each other that connection and life that you wanted together. So there's I don't know, there's a bit of tragedy to it. From where I'm sat.
There is.
Because I can imagine that experience for you guys as well was scarring. I mean, I'll ask the question, but have you is that it for you, or have you considered that's it?
Yeah.
And that in itself is really sad.
Yeah.
That was your experience of that, and it's led you to that point, which I completely understand. There's no judgment from me. And in fact, from my personal side of things, I'd have probably tapped out well before what you did. There's so much difficulty there. I mean, adoption in itself, I guess building that bond and relationship with a child that isn't biologically yours is no easy feat anyway, but to try to build a bond while navigating around abuse and violence from the child, I mean, that must be so difficult to not allow resentment, anger, and all those things creep in. Because I know it would with me. It's one of those things. I've got so much respect for people that adopt, or people, even step parents is another big one. I mean, you know, I'm, like I said before, I'm remarried, and my wife is an amazing stepmom to both of my kids, and I'm eternally grateful for that. The relationship between all of them is fantastic. There's no animosity. I don't think I could have done it.
No.
My wife's got no children of her own, so she kind of not took on because my kids have still got their mother, but she stepped in as like a second mother role fantastically well. If I'm honest, I don't think I could have done it in return. And I've mentioned this before on episodes, but I actively, I guess, when I was looking to get into a new relationship, sought out somebody without kids. So I didn't want to be in that position to not take on... I'm going to clarify this because I'm making myself sound horrendous. But when me and my ex-partner split up, my ex-wife, moved 200 miles away. So moved down to Devon from the Midlands, a couple hundred miles. And my kids went with. My big mental hang-up on that was, I felt if I got into a relationship with somebody with children, I'd be replacing my own children. And I really didn't want to do that.
Okay.
So I couldn't get around the thought of being there in a parent role in a household with somebody else's when I didn't have my own. And that was how it all played out. I was very fortunate with how it all played out. So I've got massive respect for you guys for wanting to step into that role. And as I say, for anyone to do it, really, but it sounds like you tried to do it under the hardest of possible circumstances. And I'm just really sorry for both of you guys, for all of you, actually, for the kids as well.
That's the thing.
You all had that experience.
That's the thing that sort of hit right at the end, was that, yes, so we've got this loss and this grief to navigate, but we're adults and we can talk to one another. We can talk to other people, but they're kids. How are they gonna, because that was the last thing anybody ever wanted, was to have that impact upon them again. So they're going to have another loss now in their life that they have to navigate. So I mean, there's so much more to the story. So like the therapist that we had in, they say we're financed by the local authority from where the children came, and we were pre-adoption order, so we hadn't signed the paperwork to effectively legally adopt the kids, so they're still under the local authority's guardianship effectively.
Okay.
That's why the local authority foot the bill for things like therapy. The minute you sign an adoption order, the local authority no longer has to support them, so they can cut that funding. So what was keeping the four of us afloat was this 18 hours a week of two counsellors, as well as like our families trying to ensure that there were two adults around at all times. And the local authority came to us and went, well, this is a really expensive bill. We're not sure we're going to pay this. And they said that to us before we'd signed any adoption order. So it was a very big realization then that we knew if we signed anything, all of that help would disappear. And we would be up the creek without the paddle completely.
And they would be abandoned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know a tiny bit about that because I remember my son, when he was little, one of his friends was in foster care, lovely lad, and I spoke to his foster parents, And they were in a position where they said they'd have loved to have adopted him, but they weren't financially able because, same as that, the moment that the adoption becomes legally binding, there's no support, there's no payment, and I know foster carers are paid, aren't they, for the fostering. So yeah, it's a strange one, really. I mean, I guess on one side it's genuine adoption where you become parents. I guess you are financially responsible for the child in the same way a biological parent is, but at the same time, if you're taking on a child with such complex needs, in my opinion, you should still receive that support as part of the, for want of a better term, the package of adoption. You're not just taking on a child, you're taking on everything to that point with the child. And if what has occurred prior to you taking on the adoption requires therapy, treatment and support, that should be a part of it.
The way you can look at it in a really, you can take all the emotion out and you can say, so it was £9,000 a week. I think it was nine grand a week to have the therapist in with us. So I can completely understand why they said no. But the therapists were like, for maybe this period of time, we'd do 3 times a week, then we reduce it. So there was an idea of this short time scale that they would hope to be with us. So yes, you'd have an enormous financial outlay to support that therapy, but then the plan would then be that they'd be in a stable, secure home. Whereas they go back into the care of the local authority, and I can't give you the exact figures, but now the amount of money that the local authority will have to continue to pay out because they're now deemed too old for adoption, and because they've been through a failed adoption, they won't be put up for adoption again. We were kind of effectively told that we were like their last ditch attempt, which is a horrible thing to think.
It's a horrible pressure for you guys as well.
Yeah, I mean that was after the fact, so we weren't really aware of that beforehand. But to then think, well, they could have yes paid a huge bill to help us make the family work, but now they've I don't want to say they've got to pay for those kids for the rest until they're 18 now, but now you have this huge financial outlay keeping them in foster care. Yeah. Whereas we really wanted to make it work. It's not that we didn't want to make it work.
Well, that is the truth of it, though, Sarah. To be honest, all too often with many things in life, though, that the view isn't long term, is it's short term,
and that's
situations.
What part of the problem was. Like I understand they have budgets and we must have used a huge amount of their budget up, but I'm not sorry for that because we were trying to make it work. And like there's been this conversation on the radio about the 2+ children child benefit stuff stopping.
Okay.
It's around like trying to lift kids out of poverty and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate this idea and I really agree with it. But if we've got however many kids in foster care currently and we aren't able to financially support them going into adoptive forever homes, like there's not enough money anywhere in any system. They're all terribly, terribly broken. But this is a conversation that I don't think I've ever heard in the public eye, that all those kids in care are so failed. They are, no child deserves to be in poverty, but they are even worse off because they're just forgotten, really.
And then, well, I mean, listen, you can zoom out even further than that because you can talk about the cost towards local authorities. You can then talk about the high probability of that person ending up in a life of crime. Or, with mental health issues moving forward. So the harsh reality is that people with that background and those issues are probably going to be in and out of the system in one element or another, whether it's mental health support, mental illness, or the criminal side of things. And that's, look, for anyone listening who thinks, you shouldn't, that's a reality. The reality is the statistics show that people with those kind of traumas are more likely to end up in these kind of situations as they reach adulthood, which all costs local authorities more and more money. Because even if it's, unfortunately detaining people in prisons, it's more money. Yeah. If it's mental health services as an adult, it's more money. Yeah. If it's, council housing, it's more money. Yeah. And that's that long-term view versus that short term, listen, let's hit it with everything and fix it now. But we don't really want to spend that now.
They're all looking at that short term.
Yeah.
They're just all going on that budget of this year we've got X.
Yeah.
And it's another broken system to add to the list, unfortunately.
It is. I don't think the problem is not an easy fix either, is it?
No, it's not.
So
and I don't for a minute think that there's just like some easy answer that's just going to make it all better for everybody.
It's a lot of the time it's quite easy to point out the flaws, but to offer a solution is where the magic is, as it were. And I've done the same. I can criticise a hell of a lot of institutions and situations, but finding that solution, that's the one. But yeah, it's tough. Really appreciate that you've shared that whole situation. I'm almost tempted, to be honest, because this has come at the back end of the conversation, to like segment this off and release it almost on its own. Thinking out loud here, not within the podcast platform, but maybe just do a separate sort of like YouTube, whether it's I don't know how long we've been talking about this subject, but just of its own right, because I think there's so much great information in there to highlight.
I just think, so when I approached you about it, so I'm not a big talker. I don't tend to speak to many people about difficult things or emotions and all various things like this. But this is something that we're part of a really small group of people that have been affected by something awful like this. But it's something that I'd never heard of.
Neither have I.
Like, yeah. So it's called disruption. When an adoption breaks down, that's what it's called. Okay. And there's like most things on Facebook, there's a group for it, and there's only about 600 people in that group. But that's 600 people that have been, I mean, some of them have even worse stories than us. It is awful.
Yeah.
But people don't know about it. And then when you look, so this almost makes it sound worse, but our prep training group, when we did the adoption training, we kept in touch with 4 groups. One was a single adopter who also disrupted because of similar violence and things like that. There's another couple who are the only couple that successfully adopted. They also have lots of troubles, bless them, but they've continued. They've made it through and they've signed the paperwork. And the other couple that we speak to didn't. They never matched with a child, and they withdrew from the process entirely. So out of the people we kept in contact with, there's only one successful adoption out of all of that.
That's interesting. Yeah. As I say, as I said to you on the phone when we spoke initially, it's not a subject I knew anything about. Nothing. And I guess that says a lot in itself, really. I think there's sort of like an element of shrouding around adoption, because potentially successful adoptions, once it becomes successful and the adoption goes through, people don't really like to openly talk much about the fact that they've adopted. It becomes their child, and that's the way it's referred to.
I think a lot of them do. So incidentally, I've come across more people that have taken the adoption journey since we started doing it. And like, obviously we've had a terrible experience, but I would like to caveat that is not the case for many, many people. Lots of people have really successful adoptions and go on to create their forever family, and it's brilliant and it works. That's not the case all the time, which is why I wanted to talk. But yeah, it's just I've met more people since, and sort of, so I've got a tattoo here which is for the children.
I've clocked that a few times, and I was going to ask. I was going to do it off camera, but now you've brought it up.
It's fine. I'm quite happy. We have matching tattoos actually, and every so often, because it's a visible one, people ask, and it's a bit like there's nothing else with it, and people ask, and I have said what it's for. And actually, I was at a job where I went, well, actually, we went through this, and she went, oh my God, our son is adopted too. And it was, I think this couple, particularly the woman anyway, she's just sort of felt this. She started speaking to me then so openly about like her experience of it. And I don't think she would have had that conversation with me had she not known my experience. So it has opened up conversations with people.
It's the power of talking, Sara,
yes.
which is the whole purpose of what we're doing here.
I know, I'm so bad at it.
You've been amazing. You've been amazing. I would not know that you don't normally
get me on a topic that I like things. And I can talk a lot.
There we go. The question, though, I mean, we're well over half an hour in, but did you forget the camera was there?
Mostly, yes, because I've just tried to look at you.
That's a win. I'm going to tell you that. That's a win.
I'm like, just don't look at that screen that's down there staring at me.
That's a win. I'm going to take that. Yeah. A lot of people do say that the same thing. Like, once you get talking, the nerves kind of die down. And it is perfectly natural. I said to you pre-record, for the first 10 eepisodes, I was shitting myself. I still get nervous now and again now. Luckily, it kind of dies down pretty quickly. But yeah, it still creeps up because it isn't a natural thing to do.
No, it's not. It's weird.
But very important.
It is, I agree. And one of those things, so Lauren's for a long time in our relationship been like, you should go to counselling, like it's really, really good. And I was like, no, I don't want to talk. And then obviously we had this awful experience, and I sort of went, oh, I don't want that to come and bite me in the arse 10 years down the line because I've not dealt with it. So I went and found a therapist. This was a really challenging thing for me to do because, as I say, I'm not particularly good at talking to people generally. So finding one that I was like, yeah, I'll talk to you. Our social worker actually gave me this person's details and went, they're an ex-social worker and now a counsellor. So they will have an idea of kind of the language that I was going to use around our experience and a bit of experience around kids in care and things. So having that kind of recommendation of someone who would know, I sort of saw their picture, read a little bit and went, okay, yeah, I think I can trust you. But Lauren and I have been together a long time and it's taken me that long to go to counselling. But I've been, and I can wholly say it was absolutely the right thing to go and do, to clear up and understand as best I could everything that happened, my reactions to it, to understand like the complete shutdown that I had around that time, and how like I couldn't support my wife during that time. Like she was putting so much work and energy into it, and I was just like this robot just going along and like playing the part, trying to make it work. That then I owe it to her to understand my part in all of it, because I think in a lot of ways, like when people lose a child, a lot of relationships break down. We haven't lost in terms of like a death, thank God, but we have lost something. And I think it would have been really easy for me particularly to just go, right, I'm going to put that in that box and I'm going to put that down there and I'm never going to address it. Never. But that would have impacted our relationship. So for me, it was really important to make sure that I could own my part in it. I could start to understand myself better. Hopefully be a better wife as well.
I'm really glad you did. I'm a massive advocate for counselling, even though hands up I've never been. I'd love to. It's just the normal excuses of time, money, and all the rest of it. But if I'm honest, this is my counselling. Like having these conversations, studying psychology, that's how I've dealt with my own personal thing. But I'd still love to, and in the future, it's in my future somewhere. I will go for it.
I would advocate anybody go. And I've been having a conversation with mine recently where I'm like, well, I feel like I've dealt with that. I don't feel like I've got any trauma to discuss with you now. What should I say? And she's like, well, you don't have to come with something awful every week. Like this is the time for you to unpack everything. Like I'm not gonna lie, I've had a session where I talked to her about paint for an hour.
I mean, it is pretty stressful at times, to be fair.
Oh no, I was literally I was like the technical data sheets of things, and I was really don't get me started, because bless her, but she sits and she listens, and that was therapy as well, getting to talk about a passionate subject of mine.
I think it's a great way to think of doing it, and I need to practice what I preach myself. But I think the American way of looking at things, because they've all got therapists, But it's a little bit more like, it's the same as physical health. To maintain your physical health, you go to the gym. To maintain your mental health, there's nothing wrong with going for therapy once a month, once a fortnight, once every 6 months, whatever. Just like an MOT, like a check-in. Like, all right, sit down, how are you feeling? Anything troubling you right now? Okay. And it's that catching things early, isn't it? It's like you go to the doctor when you first notice a problem. It's much easier to fix than down the line when it's huge and infected.
Yeah, if you're trying to unpack things, I can imagine that would be much, much harder.
Yeah, so I think that's great personally if you work through the main traumas and then just keep a foot in the door with it.
And talk about paint every once in a while.
Talk about paint every once in a while, yeah. At least that saves that.
Yeah, you don't. Lauren doesn't enjoy a conversation about paint quite so much.
A fellow paint advocate over there, Lauren.
Yeah, they don't.
Doesn't do it for you.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Sara, I really appreciate you sharing your story. I know it was hard at times, but I think it's been invaluable information. And as I've said before, with these episodes and the more niche topics conversation, if it helps one person, then that's more than worth everybody's time involved. Is there anything we haven't discussed that you wanted to talk about?
I was going to go to you. Do you think I've missed anything?
I don't think so.
No. Is there anything you want to say?
I don't think so.
No. Okay.
No. It's. I mean, we haven't even talked about business and that kind of thing, but I think it's more important what we've just talked about.
I think it was one of the big reasons that I wanted to speak to you. Yeah. It's sort of the point of your podcast for an awful lot of it. Like, I'm quite happy to talk about business, but I don't have as much of a traumatic thing to talk about with business just yet.
Well, to be honest, Sara, I really appreciate you trusting me and trusting this platform to come and talk today. So again, massive thank you. In case anybody does listen and resonate with anything you've said, or even want to reach out and ask any questions, first of all, would you be happy to speak to people if anyone's got anything to ask?
Yes, I would. My only caveat would be if I don't reply to a message immediately, is because I'm a little bit overwhelmed and I've gone, oh God, I've got too many messages. I can't reply to them right now, but I will read things and I will reply as soon as I feel like I've got enough spoons to do it.
There'd be never any expectations, in which case, where can people find you?
So they can find me mostly on Instagram, although my Facebook's linked to it, but it's SK Painting and Decorating.
As always, I'll put Sara's details. I'll pop a link to your Instagram on the episode description so people can give you a follow, show some support, and if needs be, reach out. I know quite a few previous guests do get messages from people that have maybe been through similar things or just messages of support, whatever it might be.
I've messaged a couple myself.
There we go. Yeah, exactly that. So if you're still listening, Sara's details will be on the episode description. Again, massive thank you for giving up your time and coming and talking to me. It's been great.
No worries at all.
Fantastic. Oh, before I forget and got told off, I have got some guest merchandise to bestow upon Sara.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
From the Funky Peach, who are now doing all of my guest merchandise. So massive thank you to you guys for providing that stuff. It all helps with the continued growth of the podcast. I haven't actually said this for a while, but please, if you haven't already, can you follow, share, subscribe, wherever you're listening, show some support, leave a review, whatever it might be. It all helps with the algorithms. So it shows new people the podcast that might need to hear some of the messages that we're discussing. So yeah, to everybody, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you again soon on the next one.